Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, and thank you for watching IT Pro TV, helping you level up with IT learning everywhere you go. I'm your host, Zach Memis, for this episode of CompTIA Linux Plus. Scheduling tasks. It's something we all have to do, but let's ask Don Pizzetta how he does that. Don, good to see you.
Hey, glad to be here, Zach. And I am pumped up about this episode because it is all about procrastination, right? Why
Yes.
do something now when you can do it later? In this episode, we're going to learn several different ways in Linux that we can say, you know what? I'm going to punt on this task. We'll tackle it at another time. Sometimes you want to run a job at a particular time on a particular day, just sometime other than right now. And there's plenty of ways to do it. So we're going to see how those work, how to monitor it, make sure it's effective, and ultimately see how we can use this to set up maintenance and support in our environment and make things just run the way that we expect them to run. So that's all coming up right here in this episode.
Don, what is the easiest way to schedule a command?
All right, the easiest way, unusually enough, actually turns out to be a really old command that we have from the early Unix days called at. The at command, normally when we run a command, we go into the shell, we type something, and it runs it right then. But we can use the at command to say, I want to run this command at a certain time. And so that's really neat. Here's our chance to delay it. And, examples of that would be things like, let's say I want to run a backup. And when I run a backup on my system, there's any number of reasons why I might not want to run it right now. Maybe I've got files open, and so I need to make sure my files are closed to get a good, clean backup. And so I don't want to get out of my software. I'm using my computer. Or if a backup starts running right now, it's going to slow down performance on my system. So I want to run that command tonight at 10 p.m. All right. So instead of typing in to run my backup now, I can call it with at and specify a particular time, right? So let's take a look at my folder here. So in my home directory, I have a little script called backup.sh sitting right there, right? It's a bash script that has a couple of commands in it that are designed to archive my home folder, just dump it into like a tar gzip or something, and then copy it somewhere else. Maybe we FTP or SFTP. Once you're in a script, you can do whatever you want, right? And then I can use the at command to call that script and set it up to run at a later time. And the way we do that is, well, first off, if you're using a script, you want to test your script. Make sure the script works. Because if you do a scheduled command and you're scheduling something that doesn't work, then obviously it's not going to work. And then you don't know, was it the schedule that was the problem or was it the command that's the problem? So first off, test your command to make sure it works. Then we need to schedule it. And the way we do that is by using at. Now, if you pull up the man page for at, it'll show you a lot of information about at and a couple of other commands that go along with it, like ATQ, which is how you view a list of all of the scheduled commands. That's the at queue. And then at RM, that's how we remove a scheduled job. We get rid of one if we don't need it anymore. And after that, it's basically telling you need to specify the time and the time specification, and then you specify the commands that you want it to execute. Now, the time spec, it doesn't actually list it out here. I think it just briefly mentions the time in the documentation. But in the early days, the at command relied on the Unix epoch format, which is however many seconds have passed since January 1st, 1970 or 1971. It's a ridiculous number that's a nightmare to calculate. In the modern form of at, we can actually just write it in a human readable format, which makes life really easy. So for example, today is Friday, and I want this backup to run at 10 p.m. today. So the way I would do that is I just type at 10 p.m. FRI, right? And it will interpret that. It'll look at it and see, all right, 10 p.m. on Friday. And it'll convert that into the Unix epoch in the background. I don't have to do it. That's the important part. And now I've got that time set. Now, you're just going to type it like this, at followed by when you want the command to run. And when you press enter, it's going to take you to the at prompt. And now you can type one command or a sequence. You can type tons of commands to tell it what you want to run at 10 p.m. So for me, I wanted to run this bash script in my home directory. All right. Now, some distros are set up where you can just call the script directly. I could say /home/dpz/backup.sh. Right. I probably don't even really need to specify /home/dpz. I could probably do a tilde. So it's going to run under my user context. So the tilde would resolve to my home directory. If this was running under some other user's context, I'd really need to specify that home directory so it knew exactly where to look. Now, in my case, I forgot to make that script executable, so I can't call it directly. I need to call bash first. And that's no problem, right? Because this is, whoops, it is a little problem if my left arrow doesn't work. So what we can do is we can call bash first and then point it at the sh command. So if I do /user/bin, if I can type /bash, and then I point that at /home/dposit/backup.sh like that, and I spell it right. There we go. Then that command will execute at 10 p.m. And then I can go on and specify other commands. Like maybe I want to view the uptime of my system. There's really no point in doing that. But you would just type however many commands you wanted. This is what you want to have happen at 10 p.m. Right? And when you're done, you just hit Control D. Control D tells it that's the end of your list. You don't have any more commands, and it drops you out. So it's telling me that I now have job number 3 scheduled. Now, this is the first job I've scheduled. Well, it's the first job I've scheduled today. Every time you schedule a job, it gets a number. And even when that job is done, the job goes away, right? It's gone, but that number's been used. And so it increments. And so your job number might be 10,012. It could be some giant number if you schedule enough jobs over time. But if it's the first time you do it, it'll be job number 1, and it's now scheduled. Now, I see I'm job number 3. Do I have other jobs scheduled? I don't know. I can look at my queue and find out. So if we type ATQ and run that, I'll see that I don't have a job 1 or job 2. Those must be jobs that ran previously. But if I did have job 1 and job 2, then I would see them right here. I would see 1 and 2, when they were scheduled, and the user that did it, in my case, me. And I can see right now I do have a job scheduled for Friday at 10 p.m. It did convert it into a 24-hour clock, so it's showing 2,200 hours, and it's scheduled to run. Now, that job, if we were to wait around until 10 p.m. tonight, will execute. And as long as my script is valid, hopefully I've tested the script and made sure it worked, then it's going to execute, it's going to run, and my backup will now happen at 10 p.m., which is really nice. But let's say I change my mind, and I want this to run at 9 p.m. instead. Well, I can get rid of that job by doing atrm, or @remove. And I can remove job number 3, and when I do that, if I do ATQ afterwards, I can see I don't have anything scheduled anymore. It's removed that job, and now it's not going to run. So this is a really easy way. If you're just trying to do something one time, I need it to get in there and do something at a particular time, is the easiest way. It doesn't require crazy services, and it's a part of, to my knowledge, it's a part of every Linux distro out there. It's been on every one I've ever touched.
Can everyone use the @command, or is that limited to administrators?
Pretty much everybody can use the @command. Now, it does run commands under your credential, so when you use it, it's going to behave as you. You can't do anything beyond what you'd normally be able to do. And if you run into an environment where you try and use the @command and you're not allowed, then it means that your system might actually have special permissions on it. @'s a really old command. And you can always spot the old commands because they have these crazy ways of restricting permissions on them. They use allow and deny files. You see this with TCP wrappers and a few other technologies, usually the older stuff. If you take a look inside of /etc, look in your etc folder for files that start with the word @. And what you might find, you might not find anything, or you might find an @.deny or an @.allow, or both, an @.deny and an @.allow file. All right. What those files do is they either allow or deny you the ability to run the @command. Now, if you don't see either one, if there is no @.deny or @.allow, then on your system, only administrators will be allowed to use the @command. Right? That's the default if there's no file. But if there's even one file created, if @.allow exists, then any username in that allow file will be allowed to use @, and everybody else will be denied. Mine's the other way around. I've got an @.deny. Any user in @.deny will not be allowed to use @. Every other user will be. So on my system, is enabled by default for all my users, but it's blocked for some people. Let's see who it's blocked for. So if I take a look at @.deny, it appears to be empty. So if it is empty, that seems odd. Let me sudo that real quick just to make sure it's not a protected file. Yeah, it's empty. So cat.deny in my case, or @.deny, is empty. And that means that everybody is allowed to use on my system. Now, what you'll find, I'm actually surprised to see that, because usually what they'll do with a distro, and this is CentOS, a respected distro, they'll normally take service accounts, like your Apache user account or other things. Those service accounts, they don't want them running @. because an attacker could abuse that to run commands at a higher privilege. And so usually you'll see that filled with service accounts, and there'll be a nice little list in there. Like on Ubuntu, I know you definitely see quite a list in there. But in CentOS, looks like they're allowing everybody, and that's it. So just know that it does vary from system to system.
Don, can we create recurring tasks with the @ command?
Not really. So that's probably the
Oh.
biggest limitation of @. With the @ command, I gave it one command or a series of commands to run at one particular time, 10 p.m. tonight. Let's say I wanted it to run at 10 p.m. every night, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, every day of the week. I want it to run at 10 p.m. Well, in I would have to run the @ command over and over to schedule all those jobs out. It's not recurring on its own. That would be me like manually making it recur, which is really not recurring at all. So is not good for that. Instead, we have another service. Now, this other service is a little newer than but it still came out back in the 1980s, so it's still pretty old. And it's called cron. Cron is, I think it's like the Greek or Latin root for
Sounds like something a
time.
barbarian would say. By Kron.
the god of time battle. So what cron does is there's actually a service that runs in the background called cron D, the cron daemon, and it keeps track of time. And so it's watching the time on your system and performing different tasks. And so it's actually basically a replacement for That's really easy though, so that's why it's still around. Cron's a little bit harder. But with cron, you can schedule one-time tasks if you want, or you can schedule recurring tasks. It can really do a lot of powerful stuff. And every distro that I've ever touched has always had cron there, and not just had it, but relied on it. It was installed and active by default. If you get a secure distro, something like, if you do Red Hat Enterprise Linux and do a minimal server install, it's got cron and it's running by default because they all rely on it as that de facto scheduler. So if you have a recurring task, you don't want to look to you want to look to cron instead. It's very powerful. You can execute anything you can execute with you can execute with cron. It's just a more complex syntax.
How do we schedule jobs with cron?
Well, with we had a nice little command,
Mhm.
and it was pretty easy. We just said and we typed the time in a human readable format. Cron, on the other hand, is a full-blown service, and it requires configuration files, and the configurations are not as easy to write. Now, some of it can be a little bit painless. It depends on how picky you are, how tight your requirements are in order to work with cron. It can be easy, or it can be a little more complex. So let's just say I wanted to go easy. Okay, I want cron to execute a task for me, and I don't really care about the time, right? I just care about the interval. So maybe I want to run a backup once a day, or once a week, or once a month. And I don't care what time of day it is. I just want it to occur once a week, once a day, once a month, whatever, right? That's probably the easiest scenario with cron when you're not constricted by time, because you'll find some config files that actually make that super easy. If you take a look inside of /etc, you'll find a number of cron folders. And let me find mine right here. So I've got cron.daily, cron.hourly, cron.monthly, cron.weekly, right? Those are my intervals. If I want something to run every day, here's this folder, cron.daily. I can put something in there and it'll run every day. I don't know what time, but it will run every day. And then cron.hourly, it'll run once an hour. I don't know what minute in the hour, but it will run once an hour. If I do monthly or weekly, right? Like their names imply. And a lot of operating systems are actively using these. If I go into cron.daily, it's just a folder. And if you look, what you'll typically find is one of two things. You'll either find script files, so a bunch of .sh files, or you'll find links to binaries. And that's what I'm seeing with some of these, like log rotate. Log rotate is a service, and so it's being called to rotate my logs out once a day, right? So that the log files don't get too big. If we look in cron.monthly, let's see what's in there. Empty, all right, so nothing. Cron.hourly, it's not empty, it's got Anacron. All right, so another cron service. I'll talk about that one a little later. So we got a couple of different things that are kind of floating in here. And each of these, let me go back to cron.daily. If I do an ls-l to get the long listing here, actually, I thought these were links, but they are not. These are actual script files. They just don't have .sh stuck on the end. They're flagged as executable, and if I were to look inside of one, like if I cat log rotate, permission denied. I do need to be an administrator. So let me sudo that. There you go. It's just a bash script, right? So you can write a bash script that does exactly what you want, like my backup.sh file. I could just copy that into the daily folder, and now I'm doing daily backups. Or I could copy it into the monthly folder, and now I'm doing monthly backups. And that way, I easily have those scheduled, and it's recurring. It'll just keep going every day, every month, until I go and remove the script from there, right? So that's pretty easy. In fact, you could argue that it's easier than the @ command because I don't even have to type a time, except there's some uncertainty here. And that uncertainty is something that doesn't work for every task. But if I'm just concerned about, I need a backup once a day, this is perfect. We throw the files in there and then we're in business.
So, Don, what if we want the tasks to run at a specific time?
All right, that's where it gets harder. Okay, that's where all of a sudden that @ command becomes a lot more attractive. So if I want a command to run at a specific time, I need it to run, I want my backups to run at 10 p.m., right? Now I've got to go and modify an actual fully defined cron job. These folders, these subfolders here, they didn't always exist. In the early days of cron, you didn't have them. So that's kind of a newer thing. And when I say newer, like in the last 10 years. So not that new. But they're designed to be an easy convenience. Originally, cron just had one file that was called the cron tab or the cron table. And that table had a list of commands and intervals, times, that were attached to each one for when they would run. And so you would edit that table and you would put in what you wanted to have happen. Now, you can see that still. A lot of it is still present. If I go into /etc, I was showing you guys all the cron.interval folders, right? But you'll also find this file right here, crontab, okay? And the crontab file, that's that one text file that had all the jobs originally, okay? Now, in my distro, I still have crontab. It might be empty, but it's probably got at least 1 or 2 jobs in there. You never quite know. It depends on a different distro. Some distros have moved away from using the crontab file, and they'll have a crontab.d folder. And in the crontab.d folder, you'll then have multiple text files that are all read in as part of this. I'm on CentOS 7 right now, and it does not have that crontab.d. Oh, actually, hang on. It's not crontab. It's just cron.d. Sorry, right up there. So I do have it, cron.d. So let's take a look at both. Let's start with that crontab file. If I cat the crontab file, so this is /etc/crontab, okay? What you're going to see, or what I'm seeing here, is some basic information, and notice how most of the lines are commented out. In other words, they're not actually being read. The only ones that are being read are the first 3 right here, which are just setting up an environment. This is saying when I run a command, here's the environment. Here's the path I'm going to use. Here's the shell that I'm going to use. And if something goes wrong, here's the person I'm going to send an email to, right? That's all that says. The rest of this is commented out and does nothing. So I don't have anything in my crontab file. But if I wanted something, I would just come and add it to the end here. And they have a good, well-documented syntax. The first part here, see these 5 asterisks? Those are the time. When do I want this to run? And it's in a weird format. Like, this format is just unique to cron. I don't think anything else makes use of this, just in the cron world. The first asterisk here represents the minute. If I want to run something at exactly 10 p.m., then the minute would be 0. So I would type a 0 there. If I wanted to run at 10:15, then I would put a 15 here for the minutes, right? So I'm telling it the minutes. That's followed by the hour. So again, if it's 10 p.m., except notice that it's in the 24-hour clock format. So 10 p.m. would actually be 22. So I'd need to put in 22 for the hour. Then the day of the month. What days do I want it to run on? If I want it to run on the 1st or the 5th or the 17th, I would put in that number. Next is the month, and it's 1 through 12. They also let you type the day, but it makes the formatting weird, so most people don't do that. Sorry, not the day, the name. You can type the name of the month, but most people stick with the numbers 1 through 12, right? And then lastly, you have the day of the week. Maybe I don't care what day number it is. Maybe I just want this to run on Wednesdays, or I want it to run on Fridays, and so you can specify that. It starts with 0, and Sunday is 0. So if I want something to run on Friday, then that's going to be 5, right? Then 6 would be Saturday, back to 0 for Sunday, all right? So that's kind of the format there. After that, you specify the user account it's going to run under, followed by the command to actually execute. And this is why I say it's a little bit harder than the @ command. With @ I could just type the time I wanted it to run in a human readable format. But here, because it's an interval, the format is strange. And when you look at it, it looks like just 5 numbers in a row. And unless you know what each column represents, it's confusing. And that's why they take the time to document it here like this. Now, mine is empty, and that's odd. So let's go take a look at the cron.d folder and see what we've got in there. There we go. Inside of cron.d, I see a few more text files. Now, these files are probably not going to be documented like the main file was, but they're going to have jobs in them that should follow that same format. So let's take a look at one of these. There is a systat task that's probably updating some kind of system statistics. So let's take a look at what's in there, and I get SYS. Oh, I left an S out, and permission denied. I will get it. Let me do that. There we go. All right, so looking at it, sure enough, it's not documented like the other one is. And what I'm seeing are a few different things that are commented out, so I can ignore those. But let's look at this last one. Okay, this last one shows that at 23 for the hour, so that's 11 p.m., and then 53 for the minute. So at 11:53 p.m., every day, every month, it's going to run as the root user the SA2-A command. Okay, those asterisks mean every. You probably don't want to do every minute. If you had a star for every minute, then it would run every minute, 60 times an hour. I mean, maybe you got a task you want to run every 60 seconds. That's what would happen, right? The 23 there, if you did a star, it would run every hour for 24 hours, right? There would be 24 times a day. The others, though, every month or every day of the week or whatever, that's how we set up a daily task. And so this is going to run every day at 11:53 p.m. Now, some of them have a little bit extra here, like this one, */10. Okay. In this case, it's running the system statistics also using the SA1 command, and it's running it every 10 minutes. This one's dialed it down a little bit, that */10. It's not saying run it every minute, it's saying run it every 10 minutes. So you get a little bit of variation in syntax there. And actually, this one they did document, it says it right there, every 10 minutes. So you can start to get a little more granular. But this is all it is, a text file written in that format. And by dropping it in cron.d, it now reads it, and it'll run that task at a regular interval. So that's the way that cron functions. A little more complex, but a lot more powerful. And this is kind of the go-to tool. I know a lot of administrators out there who don't use the @ command at all. They just rely on cron to do everything. And so, maybe one day we'll see @ go away, but it's just so easy that it kind of sticks around.
Well, by cron, how do we schedule a job for an individual user?
All right, so I want to walk us through scheduling jobs for users as well as for the system. And I know we're low on time on this episode, so why don't we break into a part 2?
Okay.
We've learned about cron and @ in this episode, right? So @ just for one-time commands, cron for recurring stuff, or you can use it for one time as well. It's a little trickier there. You have to be really specific to go one time in cron. But either way, so you can use either one. They both function. We've looked at them, and I've been looking at global files that affect the whole system, right? But with cron, we're oftentimes going to want jobs that either just apply for an individual user or apply globally, and I want to show how to set those up. So tune back in for part 2, and we'll tackle it from that other angle.
Well, I know I'm going to. Scheduling tasks part 1. Join us for part 2. And last words, Don?
Don't be afraid to use either command. Both of them are present in, I'm pretty certain, in every distro that's out there. I've never encountered one that didn't have them. They're incredibly useful. Cron, you certainly want to pay attention to, because if you ever have a system that gets hacked or compromised, usually the attackers will put cron jobs in there so that if you clean up the exploit, if you block them, a cron job will run later and put their malware back in or put their payload backdoor or whatever it is back in place. So cron is a target for attackers. It's something you'll want to audit and monitor.
And CompTIA Linux Plus continues. Make sure you watch each and every episode. Don's doing a great job putting this information together for you. You can use it now and in the future. And don't forget about the supplementary information in our course library. It's there to do one thing, help you be even more successful. So check that out too. And tell everybody you know about IT Pro TV. IT Pro TV is binge-worthy. Thanks for watching. I'm Zach Memis.
And I'm Don Pizzette.
We will see you again next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.